Someone came to see me. Can you guys hear me all right? I think it fell down a little. We'll see if we can get it to behave. How's that? Someone came to see me this afternoon, and first thing she said when she came in was, "Jen, let us lie down." And she was so happy, and I could feel a kind of envy in me of like, oh, that sounds nice. She said, yeah, when Marion came to get me, I thought, oh. She said, I do want to see you. It's not that. It just felt so nice to lie down. And aside from sort of the nice thing about this part of Sesshin is whatever anyone's feeling, you're usually feeling too, especially if you're in any kind of proximity to them. So without even having to lie down, I felt like I got to. But the other thing is, I was thinking about today. It sort of seems in some ways a distant memory, but it was a bit of a chaotic morning. And what I liked was that the lying down sort of felt like a jewel of it, that it was practice in action what happened today. It was a Hakuin thing. Hakuin always used to say, like, screw sitting on the cushion. It's like all my biggest awakenings, and he said he had lots, came by being in the world. And it felt like, Todd came into our leadership meeting this morning and said, we have COVID. It's like, yes, we have COVID, all of us, it's here. And just that perennial Zen question, what now? What do we do? How do we respond? And it was very much an example of no going around it. Opinions aren't going to help. Condemnations aren't going to help. Judgments aren't going to help. Wishing we had done it differently in any way was not going to help now. So we enter. We come in here, and JJ was kind enough to go get a bucket of COVID tests and a bucket of masks. And we swab our noses and we see where we are. And then we come back and we sit. And within, I don't know, fairly record time, it was like, and then Allison came and brought us right back into the heart of the matter. And life went on. And it's interesting because I guess the thing I want to talk about tonight, we're after many years of threatening, we're getting ready to do a podcast, us. And the name we've come up with for it is Meeting the Inconceivable, which came by way of something John published a long time ago on the website, and Corey said, people keep clicking on this. Yes, I wonder why. It's a great, well, what's that? Like, what? I want to know what that is. And sure, COVID's kind of conceivable, but there was still that feeling today of like, no, what now? What should we do? I mean, for me, this is sort of always happening. What am I doing with my life? Where are we? What's happening? But in the last couple weeks, I've been thinking about it a fair bit because my father-in-law looks like his life is going to be ending soon. And he has a remarkable, he's 89, so it's not coming as hopefully not coming as a great shock to him. But he has this incredibly remarkable attitude about it, which is the way it happened, the way that the decline started to happen was he loves dogs. He's not someone, he talks to his kids probably 5 minutes a year on the phone, but he loves his dogs. And a couple of years ago, they went to the pound to get a new dog, and he decided at 87 to get a 2-year-old untrained pit bull. What could go wrong? But this was the dog he loved, and no one was going to tell him otherwise. And the dog was completely reckless and wild and jumping on the counter, and and we said, who's going to walk this dog? Oh, it'll be all right. Can we arrange a trainer? Sure, why not? Okay. So the only way he could walk the dog was to get 2-pronged choke collars and walk the dog like this. And he loves the dog. But you can see, this is not going to end well. And so I guess it was probably a couple months ago, maybe a little less, we get a call. He's broken his hip. He's chipped his hip. Actually, it wasn't as bad as that. He's chipped his hip. Pray tell, how did he chip his hip? Walking the dog. But to him, this was no problem. That was the most interesting thing. You talk to him and he, no, it's all right. And they pinned his hip in 20 minutes, and he's in the hospital and he's all right. And, well, are you going to keep the dog? Absolutely. Well, who's going to walk the dog? Well, I don't know. We'll figure it out. So slowly, then soon after that, his wife broke a hip. So everything's just kind of started to slide. Again, there's no mistake to him. None. He smokes cigars, he drinks a lot of wine, he plays bridge. He loves his dog. And recently, he started acting a little funny. And they thought, where's his memory going? What's going on? Well, it turns out, somehow when he fell, he got some little opening in somewhere not good, and blood was leaking into his body. And somehow he was surviving on 25% of his heart function. And he just thought, I don't know, I'm a little tired. Shit, man. So they get him in the hospital, and all this just keeps going along, and slowly, with each kind of gathering of information, it's looking worse and worse. Oh, we can fix it with a stent. Oh, we can, well, no, we can't. Oh, we can, And his kids and other people in his life, well, let's get you to another specialist. Let's get a second opinion. He just said, I'm not really interested in that. And a few nights ago, he went into something called cardiac shock, which just meant his heart wasn't going to keep working unless they did something. And they said to him, we should admit you now. And he said, well, I think I'd rather go home and be with my puppy and my wife tonight. And I'll come back. If I'm here, I'll come back in the morning, and you can see what you can do. And everyone's, is this okay? Is it because he doesn't feel well? Is it because he's not of sound mind? Is it because, no. There's some way the truth of his situation has just landed in him. And he's feeling it as he's asking his kids to come visit. And it's showing on his face. But there's a way that he's in it fully. There's nothing outside of it. There's no other way it should've, could've, would've gone. There's nothing even particular that's needed other than what seems to be needed now. We had an earthquake earlier too, I hear. Yeah, it's just one of those days. So, yeah, meeting the inconceivable, and somehow the koan that's kept coming to mind is the koan that talks about stepping off the 100-foot pole and feel your body revealed in the 10 directions, or in the 10,000 things. And death is certainly one of those ways of imagining that, because there's no possible way of leaving anything behind. It's the one thing you have to commit to fully. Even if you don't, you're dragged in the end. And people try. I mean, when my dad died many years ago, he tried. It was like he was going to try to leave as many things behind as he could because there were so many unresolved things in his life. And in a strange way, he missed a lot of his death by trying to resolve so many things in his life and not having it fully. And I think the interesting thing about entering something fully, and you can notice this happens a lot. You come into Dokusan, there's an invitation to just meet, to enter something fully when we're walking. And you enter the hall fully, anything. And that we don't really know what's possible when that happens. It's like the lying down today. All of a sudden we become open to new information when we let go and we're just here. And so, I don't know, I want to tell you a couple stories tonight. About the magic in a way, and somebody said to me that just today, the wonder of each being. When I take in any one being, anyone, I was bowing to the altar there, I was taking in that face, the second one from the top, which is pretty intense if you haven't taken a look at it yet. And I noticed I could have just stayed there for a good half hour. I mean, you think, well, what of the hands and eyes is that? It looks fierce, incredibly fierce. It's like So, the first story is about a guy became a Rinzai teacher in 17th century Japan in 1622, named Bankei. And he was born to, his father was a doctor to the samurai for the first part of his life, early part of his life. But something happened where his father somehow lost his position and their family sort of had to do a little bit of a scramble, but then his father became a physician for just the local people. And he was kind of an interesting kid because he was incredibly bright and incredibly sensitive and incredibly strong-willed. And the only way to subdue him that his family discovered was that he had an incredible aversion to death. And if they even talked about it, or what they would mostly do is one of them would play dead, then he would immediately either stop crying or do what they wanted. And you'd think this is mean, but actually he was a pretty strong-willed kid, so you see, like, desperate times call for desperate measures. They would do this, I don't know how this got started. This is definitely a sort of boy thing. They would have stone throwing contests across the river in Japan, where boys would line up and throw stones across the river at each other. And he would always win because no matter how many times he would pelt it with stones, he just wouldn't give up. And so that gives you a little bit of a sense of his character. And he really loved school. But apparently he hated, at this time the Japanese were learning Chinese calligraphy, and he hated copying the letters so much that he would just leave school. He just couldn't bear it. And so he'd just go home, and his brother found out about this and scolded him so intensely. and told the ferryman, don't let him go home. No matter what happens, don't let him cross. And so this little boy told the ferryman, ground must continue under the water. And he just got in the water and went across by himself. But he was so worried about the conflict with his older brother that he decided, and this tells you the extreme given his aversion to death, he got a whole handful of poisonous spiders and decided he was going to lock himself up and eat them. And he did. And he ate all of them and he waited a few hours and then nothing happened, and so he just went home. So he's kind of intense, this kid, right? He's on to something. And so when they start teaching the Confucian texts in school, one day they're going through a particular passage. Maybe they were listening to David. And the teacher reads a passage that says, the way of the great learning lies in clarifying bright virtue. And he's that kid who raises his hand and says, well, what's bright virtue? And his teacher just keeps reading and says, the intrinsic goodness in each person. And he says, well, what's the intrinsic goodness in each person? The teacher keeps going, his fundamental nature. Well, what's that? The ultimate truth of heaven. And still, none of these are satisfying him whatsoever. And he becomes so violently consumed with this question of what is bright virtue, that eventually he just keeps asking anybody he can find, and finally somebody says to him, you need to talk to the Zen people. They know these kinds of naughty problems. We're not sure what to tell you. But not a single person, he didn't have any Zen people around him, and so not a single person could help. And he's 10 at this time, keep in mind. And he completely lost interest in his schoolwork, and his family got so upset with him that they kicked him out of the house. He was 11. And he was one of 9 children of that. What's one less, This one's kind of a pain. A neighbor, someone who cared about him, had a little hut back in the hills, and they said, well, you can live there. And so he made himself a little sign called Practice Hermitage and put it on the thing and set to work. And for several years he tried until he just kept throwing himself at this, and finally when he was 16 he found a Zen teacher. And the teacher said, oh, you just need some Zazen. You've come to the right place. And he studies with this teacher for about 3 years. And he just wanders and begs, and he knows he's kind of getting to something, but it doesn't work, and so he decides to go wandering again. He decides to try his luck elsewhere. And the teacher just says, you can't look outside yourself for this. If you keep going around like this, you're going to get yourself in trouble. But he's having none of it, as you would imagine. And so eventually he just locks himself in somewhere and blocks out sunlight and gets meals to him, and he concentrates so hard and he works so hard that his butt actually gets raw, and he eventually gets tuberculosis. He pushes his body so hard. He's only in his early 20s by now. But he just can't, something has him. But he also knows he's not in this fully yet. Somehow, some part of him is reaching for something. And it comes to the point where the doctor who's attending to him actually says there's nothing more that can be done. He thinks he's going to die from this. And later, Bankei says, that it wasn't so much that he was going to die that bothered him, it's that he hadn't yet figured this out. And I don't know about you guys, I know that feeling. It may not be, a piece of Confucian wisdom, but it's something. I want to taste something or feel something or know something or be seen in some way or recognize something, but it does become at some level life and death, whether we're aware of it or not. It's driving us. And whatever it is, finally when he realizes, he just starts to realize, I'm not going to get it. And he just starts to weep. And I think whatever it is for us, it's like the brink of it, having to go over the brink, some key moment. That however I'm going about it is not how I'm getting there. And he coughs up some last piece of terrible something that's just blood red that sticks to his wall. And it strikes him. It strikes him where that face struck me. And all of a sudden, all the searching and all the everything and all the disappointment and all the everything just shatters, and he just thinks, oh, red. And he just starts to weep and weep and weep, and he something has opened. Something is not looking anymore. Something has arrived at the wonder that's inherent, the bright virtue, the fundamental nature, the something that's in everything inherently. And he runs to a teacher, runs to find another teacher, because now this is an important thing too. Before he runs to the teacher, he's just washing his face. He starts to just be able to eat. Everything just opens up. His body starts to recover. He's just strangling the life out of himself, and then it blows open. And he's just washing his face, and just the wind just carries in the smell of plum blossoms. And he just starts to realize, oh shit, it's in everything. It's just in everything. I couldn't avoid it as hard as I could possibly try. There's no getting away from it now. So he's feeling pretty chuffed with himself, which was a little bit of a red flag. And he runs and finds a teacher, and the teacher says, you've seen something, but you haven't yet gone beyond. And he's a little arrogant, so he starts to laugh. And he just shakes his sleeves, and he leaves the teacher. But he doesn't leave the Zendo. And the teacher that he happened to find during this time didn't speak any Japanese, and he didn't speak any Chinese. And so the strange thing is, the only way he could communicate with this teacher was through calligraphy. And so he would write something, and then the other guy would write something, and this went on for quite some time. Until finally, something else breaks open in him, and he goes running into the teacher, and the teacher says, what is the ultimate matter? This is what he writes for him. And Bankei says, whose matter? And the teacher goes to write something else, and he grabs the thing out of the teacher's hand, and he throws it down, and he shakes his sleeve. And he walks out, and the teacher says, all right, now you go get out of here. Go do something with this. You're onto something. And what's interesting about what happened after that, many things happened, but in service of this, was that with no part of him left out, no part of him left searching, wondering, doubting, his mind became much more available to everything else. He'd stepped off the 100-foot pole, in a way. And songs started to come to him to teach the peasants. And so he did that. And then his mind just became open to the field, where he was with a companion of his one day, and he said, "My old teacher is going to die soon. I need to go see him." And his companion said, "I think you're full of crap. How would you know that?" And he said, "I don't know, we need to go." And as they started, he said, "Oh, my friend that we're about to arrive to, his wife just passed away." And his friend said, "Now you're really full of crap." But he just started, whatever he might encounter, whoever he might encounter, there was a fluidity in his consciousness that whatever was needed, whatever wanted to come into mind, just appeared, and he could trust it. And it turned out he got to his friend's house and the wife had passed away 6 days later. And the friend said, "It's very strange you're here, because on her deathbed your name was on her lips." And they stayed with the friend and continued on, and by the time they reached the old teacher had passed away. And so he just knew he was the field. He became available to the field. But there wasn't a trip wasted, because the teacher had left instructions to his successor for Bankei that said, "Do not let him hide. Make him go out in the world and teach. This is my final wish." And the really interesting thing, these karmic circles, so the very first temple he had was funded by a successful businessman who happened to be the guy who would sit at his calligraphy desk when he was a child and was his desk partner. And you'll see this, this is like just a weird thing in life, that as your life starts to become more and more and more whole through practice, so that even the unresolved things start to find their place in whatever everything comes to belong. Whether it gets resolved in your opinion the way it's resolved or not, absolutely everything comes to belong. And that's that bright virtue that every single event, every single piece of everything has its, like in the taking part in the gathering, each thing by nature has its worth, but it's shaped by its circumstances. And what he really started to be able to do, he was a very pivotal teacher in Zen at that time, because a lot of the teachers that he found no longer had, they didn't have a living truth of the Dharma. And they even admitted that to him. He would go find them and say, "I don't think you know what you're talking about." And they'd say, "We don't, but we have these great scriptures and we feel like we should pass them along." And so he revivified the spirit of, you have to find out for yourself. You have to enter your own life fully to find out for yourself. I don't know, I thank him for that. And eventually something wanted to come out of him, because retreats would happen, like 6,000 people would show up for 90 days. You just think, man, no pressure, you know? But what's interesting about that is, in some way that's no different than let's lie down in the Zendo. It's the listening to what wants to come into the field, what's here. And at this time in Japan, people were wanting something more alive. They could feel it. And, thankfully there were those people who just kept the scriptures and maybe didn't have their own way in, but passed it along, kept the tradition going. So each thing by nature has its worth. All right, I'll tell you one more story that goes the other direction. Bankei was all about, the long, hard slog that eventually paid off. This one sort of went backwards of stumbling into something and then going, oh God, what have I gotten myself into? So, Oliver Sacks, who I'm sure most of you know who he is, many years ago was hiking in Norway. And it was an absolutely beautiful day, and he decided he was going to make this steep ascent. He was feeling good. And he gets swinging, and it's gorgeous, and he said it's an afternoon of particular splendor, earth and air conspiring in beauty, radiant, tranquil, suffused in serenity. So everything's starting to come forward to him. He's feeling pretty good, and he's feeling very strong and capable and striding up the mountain. And he's getting lost in the lichen and the forest, and he's just starting to dissolve into the landscape and feel happy and sunny and alive and confident. And he's ascended probably a couple thousand feet by this point. And all of a sudden he comes around a massive boulder and he sees a sign that says in big capital letters, "Beware the bull." And he thinks, and there's a sign that has a horn that's like throwing a person. And he thinks, this isn't real. People, even though this is complete solitude up here, people must just be playing a joke. There's no way there's a bull up here. It's impossible. And so he kind of goes back to his walk and doesn't think too much of it. And he comes around another big boulder. And this time, right in the middle of the path, covering the entire path, is an enormous white bull. And he thinks, no shit. And the bull is completely calm, beautiful milky white face and big horns, and just kind of hanging out, enjoying the same day that he's enjoying, and completely calm. But for some reason, absolute terror just starts to take him over, because, well, who knows? The bull's face turns into that face up there, and the bull is doing nothing, mind you, but he starts to see the face swell, and the horns grow, and the bull become enormous, and he becomes so incredibly panicked that he just starts to run for his life. The bull also tested positive for COVID. And the problem is, it's not a good place to run for your life, let's put it that way. And so he trips and he starts to tumble. And by the time he realizes the extent of the tumble, one of his legs is not in good shape, in unusable shape. And what went from this strength and confidence and everything good, he now is completely helpless and alone and can't walk and is stranded way up on top of this mountain. And he feels just this wave of being incredibly alone. And he realizes that he's not going to be able to stay here. No one will come in any way, shape, or form that he knows of, and the temperature is starting to plummet. And he knows by the end of the night he won't make it, so he's going to have to try to do something. And two things happen to him which start a different kind of journey. The first is that he starts to feel very calm. All of a sudden, immediately calm. And the second is that he always, so sort of like the calligraphy, he always, for some quirky reason, carried an umbrella. Everywhere he went, always he carried an umbrella. And he starts to realize that he can splint his leg with the umbrella, and that he also starts to feel this wave of incredible luck that his situation is not worse. It's a promising start. Sort of like us this morning, you know? And another strange thing happens, which is he suddenly remembers, and this is that saying, the field just starts to give you things when you're open. He remembers a story of Tolstoy's about the awakening of this kind of cruel master when a peasant has hypothermia and is going to die, and the master just lays down on him to warm him and save his life, and this changed this man's life. And he starts to wish so deeply for a companion of any kind in this situation he's in. But again, the thing that comes into his mind is an animal he once saw that had hurt itself and was dragging itself along. And he immediately felt this overwhelming connection with this little animal that he had seen. And he starts to, it also gives him an idea. And he starts to feel his humanity, his separation of humanity starts to disappear. And he starts to feel closer to life because he's down in it somehow. And he starts dialoguing in his mind with a preacher from his childhood. And he says, but I want to live. He feels this incredible conviction in himself. He wants to live. And the preacher very clearly and unemotionally just says to him, there's a season for everything. Things are born and they die, and it's all part of the mystery of it all. And he recalls many people he's been with who have faced death, and that there's just this facing the truth of the situation, whatever it is. And this somehow, it sharpens him, it sharpens his mind to just see his situation objectively. And this starts to happen in Sesshin too, where there's just less involvement and attachment, and everything starts to fall open, and you just say, oh, this is what's being born in me, this is what's dying in me, this is what's falling away in my life, this is what I need to step into. Things just become sharply clear. And your arguments about it, and your opinions about it, and your anything about it just start to fall away, and he gets a very intense taste of this. And this allows him to actually enter the situation fully. He can face the whole thing, and he really starts to make himself a raft for himself. He starts to, in his body, get down, and he slides on his backside, and he uses his arms for motion and steering, and then he uses his other leg for steering and braking. And he somehow just gets into a groove of moving himself. And what shocks him the most is how natural this becomes, as if I'd been secretly practicing it my whole life. He just becomes what's needed. And this goes along all right, but then a stream comes. It's like, shit. But he flips his raft, and he somehow gets himself across. And once he reaches the other side, he's so cold, and he starts to feel, he can feel what, like, what? just lie down here. I could just take a nap. And something in him snaps and says, this is the sirens of death calling to you. Do not listen to them. Keep going. And then the strangest thing that happens to him is where muscle was sort of propelling him along before. He said somehow he started to music, meaning that a rhythm started to come from inside of him and started to move into his limbs. And there would be a row and stride and huff, and he got so into the music of what his body was doing. He said a couple of things I'll share with you. I did not contrive this, it happened to me. A rhythmic rowing song, and then he just starts his own chant. Without haste, without rest, without haste, without rest. And I no longer had to think about going too fast or too slow. The music ensured the right tempo. And the beat came from within and the muscles followed. And everything just became this locomotion. And somehow he starts to feel incredibly happy doing this. Incredibly happy. And the sun comes out and he starts to feel warm and he's just going along, and he said he forgets the bowl and he forgets the fear. And he said there's no room for any of that. I'm just filled to the brim with music. It's just this bright virtue of music. And in a series of memories, finally he gets so settled into this motion, this deep meditation. His entire life, all the scenes of his life just start going over him. All the conversations, all the places he's lied down, where he thought was cozy, where he thought was terrifying, who mattered to him, and in great detail, his whole life. And he realizes that it all belongs. Being inside of all of it, he wouldn't change a thing. It's all propelling him now. It's all part of him. And he finally says it's so smooth and so void of difficulties that by the time eventually these two reindeer hunters find him, and he's so far from the idea of help or salvation at that time that it just seems like they've appeared out of nowhere and that they're just a miracle. When he gets to the hospital, the very hardest thing for a long time is nobody will play any music for him. And so he begs them for music. And the music starts to just heal him. He can feel the visceral nature of it. He can feel his body coming alive in it. He starts to feel that nature in everything. And so for him, in a way, that was the beginning of his spiritual journey rather than the end. It's funny, I don't know, it's just like, just look at something now. Anything. Just look at it fully. See if not any part of you, let it enter your being fully. I notice even the blinds, that strange sun-drenched yellow, just start to be incredibly vivid and beautiful. And then somehow each thing comes to have its own nobility, its own place in things. Sleepiness has its own place in things, lying down, being broken open by fire, pain, empathy. Everything belongs here.